Welcome back to the lab. Previous video talked about that lovely Tein suspension for the Z32 300ZX that's hiding in the background behind the march. I haven't shuffled cars yet. It's Saturday morning. I'll get on with it soon. Before we shuffle cars, we need to sort out some minor changes with the suspension that we are fitting. So this is I've changed it just slightly. You see the different color springs there. There's some Swift springs. This is a setup that Tein sells to go into a Z32 300ZX or an R32 GTR. It probably fits in the R33 as well, I guess, and a couple of other bits and pieces. So the spring rates that they fit to these as an off-the-shelf bolted in your car thing might not necessarily work out ideal for certain applications. So the owner has done her due diligence, her internet inspectionizing, Googling, searching, and found that there's some springs available, Swift springs. I'm assuming they're Japanese. Yes, it's going to be Japanese springs, and they're available, and they're a softer spring, and they fit in to these. They're almost the same color, right? So you'd barely know. And with this, should we go for? Yeah, let's go for all. With this particular car, it's probably a good idea to run slightly softer springs than what that Tein setup is, because this is a two-seater, not a 2+2. So it's lighter on the back end. Because it doesn't have the spare wheel in there, because it doesn't fit, because we've got the Akabono brakes on there, you can't put the spare wheel that goes in the back of these cars on the back or on the front. So you're done. It doesn't fit the car, so it might as well go somewhere else. And it actually doesn't even have a jack or anything. I can't remember, there was a bit of weight removed from this car from what it was from factory, but it's gone back in. We put the Dynamat floor mat back in and all that sort of stuff. The air conditioning's now gone back in. It's got much bigger intercoolers. They're probably heavier. The exhaust system and stuff and things would be much the same, but I think this is probably lighter on the. We could look actually and figure it out, but I think this is probably lighter on the front of the Z32 300ZX twin turbo than what it is on the front of a BNR 32 GTR. So, because of diff, axles, big gearbox, etc., a cast iron 6-cylinder block that hangs out quite a lot longer than the V6. I mean, you guys have already internet Googlerized and come up with an answer and probably thinking I'm wrong, but I might do that later. So anyway, for a road car, it's not going to be a race car as such anymore. It's more of a road car. So we'll put the softer springs in it. We'll take these little fancy little rubber caps off the top of the adjusters on the top of the shock absorbers. We have no idea where that's set to now, do we? Haha, never mind. And we'll put the electronic control units, which I'll show you in a bit, with a GPS antenna. You can set it all up and it changes your dampening rate depending on where you are. If you go to that, I'm not going to touch that. That's over to the owner to play with that stuff. She can have all that fun, do what she wants with that. So for now, I'll just take these off. Undo this nut here basically. Hold the shaft of 10mm spanner there, 17mm spanner, undo that, top plate comes off, change the spring out for another spring. These have actually got keeper springs in them, which is interesting for a factory setup. There you go, they decided they needed those. And factory, as an aftermarket factory. Yeah, so I'll change in these other springs. I'll see if I feel like swapping cars around, and we'll get that blue one onto the hoist, pull all the wheels off it, pull all the springs and shocks out of it, put these in, put the units on the top, run the wires through the car, etc., etc. And hopefully these spring rates are pretty good. Obviously, if they're a bit soft, we got something else to try. Go back to the original ones. If they're a bit hard, we know we need somewhere in between. You could see from the coil thickness, these should be quite a bit softer, probably more suitable. These are actually heading in the general direction of what the factory thicknesses were, in the ballpark at least, whereas those were significantly thicker and would have been quite a lot harder. And New Zealand roads, you need compliance. If you're too hard, you're just bouncing off the road, you know, you hit a bump and the next little bit you actually haven't got much grip, so you need that compliance to try and hold the tyres on the road. Well, if nothing else, at least it looks pretty, right? So, something strange going on, despite having the battery disconnected for the last couple of days while I was mucking around while I was working hard, doing the wiring stuff and things, which is, as you saw in the previous video, kind of sort of wrapped up for now until we do our ignition upgrade. It drained the battery flat. So it must have done that in the day prior. So something is staying on randomly. We'll put this up on the hoist. First of all, I'm going to have a look, make sure nothing's leaking after our dyno run. We'll tear it apart and we'll put these in. And then we've got to put it back down on the ground, and we've got to set the ride height to the right ride height, because this vehicle, despite having quite a few tweaks to it now, it does have a low volume vehicle certificate. So we need to at least make it the same ride height. It's an old cert, so it kind of just says adjustable suspension. So, I mean, adjustable suspension, right? And the Koni shock absorbers that are in there and the King springs on there do have a circlip to move them on the body to adjust the height of the vehicle. So really we're not stepping out of those boundaries, kind of sort of, with these. To argue to the specifics, to the absolute letter of the law, fitting those into the air should be a recert, but no, we're not going to. That'll be all right. Stole the wheels. They would actually look pretty cool on that. This very expensive shelf for 300 ZX interior parts. Now, as is typical with a lot of modern cars, this is 1989, probably designed in 1987, but newer cars, i.e. not 1970 model cars, to get the rear springs out, the rear struts, you've got to take the interior out, or pieces of the interior. We only need to get that piece there out on each side. Unfortunately, that piece there has that piece there overlapping over the top of it, and this piece here is this piece here overlapping the top of it there. So you take that out, to take that out, to take that out, to get the two nuts on the top of the strut. And if you have adjustable struts in the back, they're about in here somewhere. Unless you drill a hole in the top of that interior, if the adjuster is on the top, as per these Tein ones, you can't access that. So hopefully that's one thing I've got to look into. Hopefully the electronic module that's in there fits on top of the strut in there, and the panel still goes on. I am starting at the rear of the car because we have already fitted one strut into the front. We know that definitely works with no issues, and you wouldn't expect there to be, but we know for sure. But let's have a look at the back and see what we're up against here. Just like that. Only took a couple of minutes actually, it wasn't that hard. Shouldn't have any problems with those actuators up there. You can see the hole in the top of the strut there for the adjustments on the Koni shock absorbers. Shall we open the box? Let's open the box and have a look how big this actuator is. I'm pretty sure they're pretty small, and people have done this before, so there shouldn't be any problems, but let's just double check just in case. Look at that. They're tiny little wee things, aren't they? How do they work? They screw on to the top of the strut. I see, they've got a thread. You screw them on. Easy peasy, right? Should be. That'll fit the general ballpark of that area. It doesn't quite go into the... Well, it does actually. Fits into the top of the Koni one. So yeah, there should be no problems with the trim going on there. There's a little bit rubber booty thing to go on there. a bunch of other stuff and things. There's some instructions to read. I probably might read the instruction manual. Probably might tell me something that I need to do so I don't destroy things. And there's a huge box. There's not a lot of wire there. Pretty short leads. Oh, trying to get this open with one hand for you. Oh, we're doing an unboxing, aren't we? Oh, holy hell. Oh, I have no idea what all these bits are. Definitely going to have to read the instruction manual. There are a lot of bits in here. Oh, this is obvious. This goes on the dash somewhere. Lots of stuff and things. Here's all our wires are under here. Good fun. Oh, I've emptied the boot out, now I've filled it up again. Old, adjustable Koni dampers, kind of sort of motorsport, kind of sort of not. King springs. New. Tein, Swift. Ta-da. You can see that's, we could measure that actually. You can see that's ever so slightly smaller diameter than that. Actual wire, the actual spring itself is a much bigger spring than that. This and that, and probably a very similar rate. Could look them up and find out actually, but can't be bothered. Doofer doofers. That green goes real well with the blue. Definitely doesn't. We did have plans originally. I was going to repaint the engine bay. We're probably a bit far into it to do that now because too many things gone back together. So I haven't really set a height. I've kind of just assembled it how it was and chucked the wheels on it, and we'll put it on the ground and just try our luck and see how we go. I suspect it'll be wrong. We've only got a relatively small window that we have to meet to comply with what it says on the low volume cert. It's a given amount, plus or minus 5% I think it is, so there's not a lot of room for error. We'll just try our luck, see where we're at. Almost perfect. Almost. We're about 5, maybe 10 millimeters too low on the front, and the front probably will settle a little bit more when we get it off the dollies, etc. So I need to lift the front up a tiny little bit anyway, is the point that I'm getting to, and the back is fine. So actually not too bad result with that. We've got the little, let's call them servos, motors, actuators, do-flicky thingies mounted on top. That's done. So there's some wires that need to go to a controller. There's a controller that lives in the front, and a controller that lives in the back. This box over here. And that talks to this conglomeration of stuff here. One of those is the one there's the one that goes on the dash there. That talks, well, rather, this talks to that because that won't give any info back wirelessly, which is good because you never have any problems with Bluetooth or anything like that, but never mind. So I've got to find a spot for that somewhere in here that looks nice, or perhaps run the wires through and put this in by the computer on the passenger side footwell, which might introduce it to interference and stuff. Like I say, wireless. But anyway, never mind, we'll figure it out. And the rear, same deal, shocks are in, actuators are in. So we can probably run just the one extension cable. It might be a bit hard to see on the screen because everything's black. This massive, big long extension cable here. That is probably long enough to put that actuator in the march, which is over there. But anyway, that's what they do. They give you heaps of wire rather than plugs and terminate them. But we've got to find somewhere for this actuator, which, again, it's you supply power and a ground to it and plug the receiver, and plug the actuators into it, and then hope that it goes. Hope that you haven't fitted it somewhere where there's too much shielding. You wouldn't put it back here, for example, because it might be shielded too much from the actual controller in the front, and it may not function. So the mechanical side of it's done anyway, and we'll get on with the electrical side of it. I'm pretty happy with the progress on that, as everything needs to be tightened up. It's all just sitting loose because I didn't expect it to actually be bang on straight away, which it pretty much is. So tighten everything up and get on with all this, and then we can put all the interior back in. Many hours later. I'm not sure, did I mention the battery drained itself? Well, it didn't drain itself. The car drained the battery flat. It's done that a couple of times. It's really weird. Something's obviously staying on. Made me think maybe I'd somehow managed to get my wiring wrong, double checked all that, and I didn't. Not this time at least, right? So I kind of got to the point where we had all this wiring mostly sorted for our forced effect damper electronic controller, whatever it's called. We're all, don't worry about the spare bits and bobs in here, but we're all buttoned up. The interior is back together and running through to the front of the car there. Now, it was staying on. Oh, these things are hard to get in and out. I could tell it was something was staying on because you could put the key. Oh, where is the key? Key's in the ignition. You could put the key onto accessory, and you could turn the key off again. The clock stayed on, and the light stayed on for the air conditioning, but only if the fans were off. If you turned it on by pushing that button there, everything turned off straight away. So it's obviously something that could hold 12 volts, but no load. Yes. Not those. That was not in there when I sold the car. As I understand it, somebody else has installed it, I believe, and the current owner might have tidied up the wiring with decent crimps or something like that. I'm not sure, whatever. Either way, either the wiring is wrong or the head unit is faulty, and that's why our battery was randomly going flat. It just depended on whether you turned it off with the fans on or not. If you turned it off with the fans going, then that would kill the circuit and everything would be off and it'd be fine. If you turned it off without the fans going, then that whole accessory circuit was staying live. Probably my guess is someone, whoever it was, has wired it up with the wire that comes out of the stereo to power up an amp, going back into the ACC power. So once you've turned it on, you can't effectively turn it off because it loops. It keeps the circuit live by feeding power back into it or something like that, maybe. Yeah. So almost everything that was done to this car after I sold it has been done wrong. Almost everything. It's had new tyres put on it. That was done right. But pretty much everything else has been a disaster. So anyway, now that I've got it to the point where I can actually turn the power off and know that it's off, we'll deal with this. Either the owner can take it away and she can get a new stereo, install it herself, or get someone else to install it, or I might supply the stereo that was in the car while I was driving around in it. We'll deal with that later. Now that I know that the key turns on and off properly, we can deal with the spaghetti for our electronic damper control and our gauges here. Make these gauges go. I think it's the sender unit for you can't even see it, can you? Should we turn some lights on? There you go, for the factory oil pressure gauge there. That stopped working. I think it's the sender unit has got a little bit of crud in it or something like that. They're notoriously bad on these 300ZXs. They tell lies. We've got a bunch of spare wires down here, which is very handy because a couple of those wires have got power on them all the time, which will be good to run our electronic damper and our gauges, and a couple of them turn on and off with the key. So we'll use those and we'll tidy the rest and we'll splice them back in insulate and all that sort of carry on. And then of course there's a panel that goes over that and the carpet flips over and it all disappears and it'll be beautiful. All right, excuse the mess. Most of the masking tape there will all disappear eventually. That's original wiring for the original ECU, which of course we've ditched and replaced with that. It's, some of these wires I did actually shorten them in the end. I wasn't going to, and this needs to be mounted properly, but that's easy enough to sort. For now we have powered it up. That there thing there, if I turn the key on, this all comes alive. It's going to try and fall on the floor, isn't it? You stay there. I'll turn the key on to accessories. It's all driven from accessory power. And look at that. It's doing some things. What things it's doing, I'm not too sure. There we go. We're adjusting the rear. Not sure if you guys can hear that. We'll have to double check if there's a calibration procedure to do on this. It's all going to be in the instructions. I just, for now, need to check that it is actually working. That's the front. Yep, it's doing things. There's a mode button here. Don't know what that's supposed to be doing. It's beeping and carrying on. There's one of them I put it in a mode before, and she went nuts. The dampers were doing all sorts of things based on G-forces, and clearly you haven't got that. Don't know. I don't know how to use this. Let's do it now. Setting up the G-forces. Oh, I better turn it off before I break it. But there you go. Quite successful. That's working. The other thing that's working, the gauges. I've introduced those to some power. I'm not going to start the car because she's a bit stinky and the garage doors are closed. But they're doing what they're supposed to do. Everything's working. This will get tidied up a little bit and then the panel will go on there. This needs to be mounted somewhere properly because the G sensors are in this unit here, and you can't just throw it in your glove box and have it kicking around, or it'll do all sorts of funny things with your dampers depending on what setting you have it on. So we've got the GPS antenna is mounted right smack bang in the middle of your screen there. She's all go. Very good. That is just about the last thing that needs to be done on this thing, hopefully, before it disappears, although we have seen down in behind there, while I was looking to find if anyone had fiddled with ignition wiring and stuff with, looks like they probably haven't, but the clutch master cylinder is leaking. So, bad luck, bom bom bom, I've got to take that out. It's not a big deal, but it is a 300ZX, so it's a lot harder than what it is on some other cars, but it's easy enough. All right, we've got Chrome tomorrow. It's quite late Friday Arvo. I better get ready for that. See if we've broken the march. We'll fix the march. Thanks for watching. Cheers, bye.